In 1976, a strange woman appeared on the doorsteps of the St. Francis Catholic Worker House in Chicago. She had no idea of her past life and only wanted to be identified as Seven. The focus was on Chicago police and detectives who repeatedly tried to identify who Seven really was. But without any leads, a lack of identification, and due to her memory loss, the case quickly grew cold. The mystery of her identity remained unsolved even at her death in 2015. However, in 2024, nearly 50 years later, when the case was finally cracked, the police uncovered the truth that was unimaginable to believe. On a snowy day in 1976, a woman came to the doorstep of St. Francis Catholic Worker House. The first person she met was Dennis Plunkett, who saw her when she was on her way to the hospital. This woman introduced herself as Mr. Seven and insisted that she was male and should only be referred to in the third person. Other workers tried to ask Seven where she had come from, but her memory was blank. If anyone asked for her name, she would tell them Mr. Seven, or he's a number, not a name. His name is Seven. Over time, she wore only men's clothes and soon became the house cook. Seven was well known for cooking spicy and sweet casseroles, as well as rice and bean dishes at the Worker House, which was home to several homeless advocacy organizations. This attracted a lot of people to the place, which quickly became a top hotspot for breakfast and dinners. Still, no one knew anything about Seven's past or where she had come from. She continued to stay in the Worker House for more than 2 decades, staying at the White House located on a residential block. Seven stayed in the men's section, offering smoking on the porch. Her life revolved around a routine centered on cooking for the Worker House until 2003, when she had suddenly passed out in the hallway. Doctors ruled the collapse as a consequence of diabetic shock, and since the Catholic Worker House could not provide the type of care Seven needed, she was moved to an assisted care facility in Chicago. Seven became a ward of the state until her death on November 18, 2015, as a result of heart disease along with dementia and persistent diabetes that contributed to her failing health. This was nearly 40 years after her first appearance at the Catholic Worker House in Chicago in the 1970s. Investigators, puzzled about her anonymity, had taken fingerprint records from her, but they didn't match to any database. Lost for what to do, they buried Seven at the Mount Olivet Catholic Cemetery. She was buried at the section for unidentified people with her tombstone only showing the numbers 04985 written on it. This number marked the amount of deaths that had taken place in Chicago, 2015, with Seven being the 4,985th case. The police first took an interest in Seven after her arrival at a care facility along Lake Michigan in 2015. Since she didn't have a legal name or any means of identification, they quickly filed a missing persons report, documenting her memory loss and disorientation. Police also tried to take her fingerprints twice, but it was unsuccessful due to disfigured fingers causing unreadable prints. Afterwards, they circulated a photo of her to other Illinois law enforcement agencies. Sometime later, the public brought up a person named Skevin, who had died in a car accident, but this was quickly proved to be a false alarm. The physical description of Seven noted her to be light in complexion, with blue eyes and short hair, having very few teeth. Still, nothing was found about Seven, not even a social security number, and so the investigation was eventually suspended. The only information the police had, aside from her history at the St. Patrick's Catholic Worker House, was that she was a Cubs fan and had childhood memories of visiting the Indiana Dunes. In 2022, Cook County investigators took over Seven's case, with the aim of identifying the woman who had helped the St. Francis Catholic Church for so long. Sheriff Tom Dart, whose office had gained popularity for the solving of cold case crimes, described Seven's case as unusual. It was weird for a person to remain unidentified both in life and after death as well. The investigators had long ruled out foul play as the cause for her sudden appearance, so they matched her previously collected fingerprint sample and ran it across multiple DNA databases, including the ones of criminal records. there was no match on that database. So as a last resort, they ran it through the military data. Luckily, there was a match on August 4th, 2023. After 4 decades of only knowing this woman as Seven Doe, she could finally be identified with a real name. The data from the fingerprints obtained from Seven's body matched a record in the military database. The match was a woman named Reba Caroline Bailey, who had been enlisted in the Army in 1961. Using this name, investigators in 2024 were able to find the surviving members of her family and piece together a few aspects of her life. Reba C. Bailey was born in 1940 in Danville, Illinois, about 225 kilometers south of Chicago. She had a stay-at-home mother, Edna Bailey, and a carpenter father who often traveled for work, so there were multiple addresses for their large family in Illinois and Alabama. Reba was the youngest of 6 children, including 2 who died before adulthood. In 1950, when she was 10 years old, her family was involved in an accident when her father stopped their car to pick up a suitcase he saw at the side of the highway. They were hit by another car, which caused a fatal accident that took the life of Reba's mother. Reba, her father, and brother were also terribly injured. Over the years, she worked as an elevator operator at a club and as a sales clerk. According to records, she enjoyed swimming, bowling, golf, and photography. However, there were no records of her in any public or private Catholic schools in Danville, nor were there any photos of her in high school yearbooks. In 1960, Reba enlisted for the Army and joined the military. She served the country in the home of chemical weapons, Fort McClellan in Alabama, Fort Ord in California, and in Texas as well. Along the line of service, she was awarded a medal for good conduct. 2 years later, in 1962, at the age of 21, she got married to a fellow veteran, 22-year-old John H. Bilberry in California. She was honorably discharged due to her marriage some weeks later. However, no one could tell what happened between the period of her discharge from the military to ending up in Chicago with no recollection of her name or life before. When police reached out to Reba's family, they found out that her husband had passed away in 1989 while serving in Vietnam. He had remarried 14 years after Reba's disappearance, but the wife and 2 of his siblings had already passed away. Reba's father and all her siblings had passed away as well, with her sister who died in 2007 being the most recent. However, she had more than half a dozen nieces and nephews living in Florida, Alabama, and Illinois who had heard of her but never got the chance to meet her. Among them was 65-year-old Ricky Bailey, a funeral home director and the son of Reba's older brother Richard, who died in 2000. In shock, he told police how his father had been looking for Reba for decades. Rick also said that he believed his father and Reba's other siblings would be very excited to hear that their sister had finally been found, supposing they were still alive. Rick further told police how over the years their family had different stories as to what caused Reba's disappearance. According to him, some said there was a huge fight between Reba and her father shortly before she disappeared. Others said it was about her decision to rejoin the military. Still, some believed it was because of her unwelcomed sexual orientation. Among all of these, no one could understand why Reba wanted to be referred to as a male or why she named herself Seven, and the people who could have known had already passed away. Investigators assumed that maybe the name Seven was related to military service or birth order. Although Reba was the youngest child of her family, relatives had found some evidence that there might have been an unnamed child before Reba was born. However, nothing concrete could be proven, but if this was true, then Reba would have been child number 7. The only thing Rick and his other cousins knew was that there had been stories of Reba visiting family in Arizona and Chicago with her husband. Some of them told the police they remembered Reba's siblings talking about how she had started using alcohol and drugs, as well as dressed like a man. Amanda Ingram, Reba's great-niece, took up searching for Reba Bailey when her uncle, Richard Bailey, died in 2001. As a family historian, she kept up a family tree with records on a family website. She showed the police photos of Reba wearing a black button-down with her salt and pepper hair. Ingram expressed her pleasure towards everything that had happened, knowing her grand aunt was well taken care of. For a while, Reba's family members considered moving her body closer to them in Illinois, but they ultimately decided against it due to the expenses and complications involved. "We decided as a family not to disturb her," Rick Bailey said. "At least we know where she is now." Family and friends were shocked when they discovered who Seven was all this time. Sam Guardino, a former house resident staying near Seven at the time, said he had accepted Seven for who she was and figured she would tell her story when she wanted to. Still, nobody could have done more to help the homeless, 83-year-old Plunkett said about Seven's good works at the Catholic Worker House. "Even though I suspected she had mental problems and tried to help, she often refused." The commander of the Missing Persons Unit, Jason Moran, said it was good for everyone to have a name. A person dying without knowing who they were wasn't a good occurrence. The Cook County investigators have planned for a new tombstone for Reba, as well as a round of military honors to be conducted for her. In addition to this, the sheriff's office in Illinois had started making plans to pass a new law that allowed post-mortem fingerprints to be checked across all DNA databases from the state and federal sections. This was reviewed in order to make identification of missing persons easier. It is beyond shocking how a woman full of life could suddenly go missing one day and be found with no memory of who she was. With all the varying stories, one can't help but wonder what really happened to Reba Caroline Bailey. Was she in an accident? Did she have children? What were her reasons for choosing to be addressed as a man? Had the signs of dementia started long before it was actually diagnosed? Sadly, she is no longer alive to tell her story and see the family she left behind while living a totally different life. However, her case will bring more light into the post-mortem identification of unknown persons.